To get started on this exercise, download the Blended Shading EPS file from the class's Moodle page. When you open this EPS file up into Illustrator, you'll notice that there are 4 different artboards that we're going to be working on. Each one of these is going to use the same technique, but there's some unique challenges for creating each of these different objects, and that's what this exercise is all about, getting you the ability to work through and use this particular line shading technique. So to get started over on this side, I'm going to zoom into the first artboard. This is going to introduce you to the technique, and I'll give you some pointers to think about when using this particular tool and technique to work in for your artwork. The first thing to know is how to set up and use the tools. For this one, I'm going to use the Line Segment tool. With this tool selected, we'll make sure our fill color is set to none, and I'm going to keep my line as a red line for now, just so I can see it, and we'll set the stroke to be a little bit thicker. So to use the blending tool, I'm going to click and drag and draw one line on one side, and then click and drag and draw another line on another side. The tool that we're going to use will be the blending tool, or the blend tool found at the very bottom. Notice that the keyboard shortcut is W. With it selected, you can click on any 2 objects. So I'm going to click on the first line and then go over and click on the second line, and it will automatically blend between those 2 lines. The best thing about this is that I can use my direct selection tool, and I can change up the position or the spacing or the placement of both of these lines, and the computer will automatically adjust everything in between. All of these lines that are created are kind of special objects that need to be expanded if we ever wanted to select those individual ones. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also notice that when I change this, it's changing up how many spacings are between it. And so this is another key aspect. With your object still selected, you can always double click on the blend tool. And this will bring up our blend options. When we turn on preview, we can set it between a smooth color to a specific number of steps. And if we decrease these steps, you can see how you can type in exactly how many you want to have in between your object. So with that done, we can say OK. And this is how we can set up the first steps for our exercise. So I'm going to grab my line segment tool. I'm going to set the width to be 2, click and drag on one end, then click and drag over the other end. Notice that I went from top to bottom and then top to bottom on this side. That is also important. I'll show you why in just a second. With both of them selected, grab our blend tool, click once on this one, then click a second on that one. This will blend all the way across in a smooth distance. Then you can double click on the blend tool. When we turn on preview, set it to be a specific number of steps, and I want you to figure out how many steps are required in between. You can do this by simply clicking the down arrow until they all nicely line up. And you can see here this was done with 30 lines in between that one. I was telling you the direction that it goes is also playing an important role. If I was to draw a line from the top down on this side, then to go over here and click the bottom up, watch what happens when I try to blend these 2 together. I'll click on this one, and then I'll click on this one. You can see now how it swaps over. This is because Illustrator is recognizing the starting and stopping point, the direction of the lines. So as you draw your lines, do make sure you're kind of starting in the same unique starting point and drawing to the same ending point. Let's do the same for down here. Now for B, we're changing up our line's profile. So I'm going to start by drawing a small, short line here, then draw a long line here. We'll use our blending tool, click once here, and then again down at the bottom. Again, to set the number of steps in between, you can double click on the tool options, turn on preview, and set it to be a specific number of steps, and then press the down arrow until you get right to the number that you want it to be. And I do believe this will be about 30 or 40, there we go, in between those. And we'll say OK to this. Now for this one, we're not going to keep the line's profile at the normal uniform width. We want to have it tapered on both edges. Whenever you change the profile, however, there's a bit of a glitch inside of Illustrator. Right now I've still got my line selected. I'm going to open up my stroke panel. Let's pull it off so we can see it. And then let's also click on the arrows until we see all of the options, because I want to see this profile down here at the bottom. With both of the lines selected, if I change my profile from uniform to profile 1 where it's tapered, you can see it automatically tapers all of the other ones. But watch what happens if I try to move one of my lines. I'm going to click on this first one and just drag it out a bit. Well, it's working now. Tell you what, let's use my regular selection tool. Grab the V tool, try to blend it out. There it goes. Notice now that the line profiles have changed for everything that's in between it. If you want to change the line profile for your entire line segments that you've created, I'm going to undo. The first thing you need to do is go to Object, down to Expand Appearance, and this will break all the lines up into their individual line segments. Now I can no longer blend them, but I can click on the individual parts in between them. Actually, let's back up one more. Again, Object and Expand. It should ask you for these options. We'll say OK. Now I can select the individual parts. You should do this before you set your line profile. So I've kept my line profile at uniform. Now with them all selected, we can change it to the tapered, and that will work from there. The main takeaway from this exercise is that you set your line segment first and then expand it before changing the profile. Let's do the same for section C. For this one, I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, click and drag out. And since I only need that bottom half of the ellipse, I'm going to choose my direct selection tool, click on this top edge and delete it away. Now I'm going to choose my selection tool, hold down Option and drag down. There it is there. Grab my blending tool and I can blend between both of those. Remember, if you double click on the blending tool, this will bring up the options, turn on preview, and let's set it to be a specific number of steps until it matches up quite nicely. It looks like 10 is good for that one. Now for this one, we want it to get thicker along one edge. Notice that when it does this, this gives the illusion of shadow, or this area getting darker and lighter as it goes across the cylinder. So for this one, we're going to set it to be a little bit thicker. If we change our profile now to profile number 4, it'll give us the correct setting, but we want to be able to expand it first. So go up to Object, choose Expand. You can say OK to that. Now with it expanded, we can choose path number 4, and this will give us the line profile that we want. Let's do the same thing for this one at the very bottom. So number D, this time we'll use our pen tool. We'll click and drag and draw off one line up here. If your line doesn't match perfectly, that's okay. Just try to get it as close as possible, and then we'll click and drag down here and drag for this line. Notice it's two different kinds of curves that we have, but we can still blend together between those two curves. Grab your blend tool, click once, and then click again. Then double click on the blend tool to bring up the options and set the spacing to be a specific number. In this case, I think it should be, there it is at 15. Again, before we change the profile, we need to go to Object and Expand, say OK. Now we can change our profile, in this case to be profile number 2, and let's set the width to match as close as possible. That'll be okay. If yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. The main thing I want you to practice is changing the profile and setting that up with the blending modes. For the second one, we're going to be shading the entire cube, but it's got a unique challenge. So starting off with this, we'll go over to our little cube. I'm going to grab my line segment tool, and let's click and drag and shade off each individual side. Now with this one, I can use a variety of techniques to get a shaded effect. We'll start off with this one by clicking, grabbing our blending tool, opening up those blending options, and setting it to a specific number of steps. Now the more lines I have, obviously the darker it's going to get, and the fewer lines I have, the less it's going to get. So if I set this to be about 30 for this one, let's draw off some more lines on this edge. If I wanted this edge to be darker, I can keep the same number of lines. So I'll grab my blending tool, blend between these two. Remember to open up your blending options and set it to a specific number. Since we had 30 on this top, we can still have 30 on this edge, But in order to get it to be darker, I can just change the width of my line. So with them still selected, change your line width to be something thicker, and now it will become a slightly darker edge. The other thing I can do is I can draw off lines and just have more of them. So in this case, we'll set two different lines. I'll set their line width back to 1 point. Then we'll grab our blending tool and blend those together. Uh-oh, looks like I made that mistake of crisscrossing it over that way. So if that's the case, it's an easy fix. All you have to do is redraw your lines, but make sure you're going from bottom to top instead of top to bottom. Now let's blend those two lines together and it works perfectly. As with the other one, we can open up our specific number of steps, and instead of having 30, maybe this one will have 40. Remember, a final thing you can do is you can also change the width or the line profile that you're working with. So if, say, I wanted this to get darker as it goes across this way, I can select this last one and have its profile be 3 points, and it fades into 1 point on this side. Maybe not exactly 3 points. Let's do it a little bit thinner. I kind of like the look of that, so we're going to keep it at that. And we'll set that to be down there. Now the final problem I have is I need to have a window cut out of this particular area. There's no good way of making the lines go on top and the bottom of this area. So instead, we're going to use a clipping mask to clip out the line segments that we created. So to do this, I'm going to move everything out of the way just to make sure I don't click on them. We'll select these as well. I'm going to grab my pen tool and redraw off this particular shape. With that selected, let's also draw off the inside part. And I'm going to recolor this just so we can see the difference of this. So let's say I made the inside part yellow. Oops. I want to be able to cut away the yellow, leaving the window almost like a donut. So we'll select both pieces. You can go up to use your object or shape builder tool, hold down the option key, and when you click on the inside of it, that'll erase away everything we have. Now I can place my lines back into place. We'll do it for this one. There we go. Uh-oh. As long as my lines are behind the object that I have, notice that if I change it blue, you can see that. When I select both the outline or the outer edge and my lines, I can go to Object, Clipping Mask, and Make, and now they're clipped inside of that object that's on top. This is also a great way of cleaning up those edges if you don't want to have the little stair steps working on your artwork. You'll do the same thing for this entire cube. I want all the sides shaded, and if you want to, you can even add a cast shadow to your object. But just make sure to use a clipping mask to clip off the area inside the windows, and even these inner walls will need a clipping mask for them. As far as the spheres go, the little cylinders, there's two different techniques we can use to shade these. The first one is to use vertical lines and give a different gradation of getting lighter and darker as we go around the edges. Here's how I would do that. I'm going to grab my line segment tool and draw off a line, and then I'll draw off a thinner line on this side. So whereas this line will be much thicker, instead of it being 1 point, we'll set that one to be about 4 point. And we're going to let it gradually get smaller and smaller. We'll set this inside line to be 0 point or near 0 point. Now when I grab my blending tool, I click once on this line and then once on this line, and you can see how it slowly and evenly blends into this one. If we open up our blending options, we can set it to be a specific number of steps and actually pull down the shading to something like this. Now I know we're using a red line for here, but if we swap this line color over to white, make sure both of them are selected, haha. You can see now how the shading effect tends to work out, and so it looks like it's gradually getting thinner and thicker across the board. The last thing we need to do is to clean up these edges. Now we could use a clipping mask, grabbing a pen tool and redrawing off or retracing off this inner edge. So let's do that for this one. Remember, with your clipping mask on top of it, you can do Object, clipping mask in Make, and this will clip on the inside of it and give you good results with that one. Don't forget that you've got an inner edge that also needs to have shading as well. Another way you can do it is by having the lines not just flow vertically, but actually follow horizontally around the contour of your object. So to do this, I'm going to use my ellipse tool again. We'll draw off an ellipse. Since I only need the bottom half of it, we'll erase away this top half. And let's set the line width to be a little bit thicker. So we'll give it maybe something like 4 points. So just like with our first object, where this one flows around and gets darker or thicker on one side, let's add that profile to this line as well. We'll use profile number 4. You can place it down here. And when we blend them together, double-click the blend options, and you can see how this gives it that nice effect going around this way. And we'll say OK. Now the only problem with this is I've set a profile before expanding. So with it still selected, let's set our profile back to be uniform. Then we can go to Object and expand everything. Now let's set our profile to be thicker to thin, profile number 4. The other thing you can do with this is, let's say I want it to be lighter on this side and also lighter on this side. With all of them selected, I'm going to use my eraser tool. And the eraser tool is usually hiding underneath your scissors or your knife. And I can go in and erase away this inner edge. Notice now that it cuts it right here and pushes everything off to that edge. All I need to do is to select these lines now. They are grouped together, so I'll ungroup them. With these lines selected, if I want the lighter edge to be on this left-hand side, I can go to my profile, swap it up, and now you can see how the lines will go off on that edge. The last thing I would need to do is to clean up the ends of this particular profile. The last thing we want to do for this exercise is to practice these blending shading techniques on a teacup that I've given you. Now you can form out this teacup however you wish, and there's a couple of things to think about. But let's use some of the things that we've practiced in this one to shade out our cup. First off, I'm going to set my light source as over here, casting down. So my darker area would be on this side. If I was to shade this, let's take it one part at a time. I'll draw off one line here. I'm going to set this line color to be black. Oops, not the fill color. And we're going to set it to be a little bit thicker. As it moves around my cup, it's going to get slightly lighter. So maybe by the time it reaches this midpoint, following its contour, to make it lighter, I'm simply going to make it much, much thinner. Now when I blend these two together, we'll click once here, click once here, and this is where we need to open up our blending options and set the number of steps that we have. You can see how it's going to nicely blend this way. The other thing I could do is to play around with the profiles of each one of these. So let's go to Object and Expand. Let's set a profile to be that thicker to thinner. And now you can see how it gets darker and also thinner down here. Now even with this done, you can see there's a little bit of cleanup that we have to do. For instance, at the very top I need to trim off these edges. I could use my eraser tool and go up to the top and very carefully cut off those points. There it is there. Sometimes when you use the eraser tool, it'll give you some results that you may not necessarily want. This is why I like to use either a clipping mask, or I can use my shape builder tool to clean it up a little bit as well. Another way of doing it, let's say I chose my pencil tool. I'm going to draw off a 0-point line that follows right along this edge. This way it'll give me a nice contour. With that line drawn, I can select everything, grab my shape builder tool, hold down Option, and I can carefully and quickly cut off all of those top points and get rid of any lines that I don't need. You can see, however, when I do that, it swaps up my line profile. That's okay. All I need to do is to select those lines again. Let's swap out their profile to go the right way. So filling this out, shading your entire cup, not just one edge like I've done, but going along all of the edges, I want you to finish shading the entire cup following those contours. Once you've finished up with everything, you can zoom out. Go up to File, let's save this as the regular EPS file, and this EPS file is what you're going to upload to Moodle once you're finished with the exercise.